Spider-Man had a pretty good run during the Xbox 360 and PS3 era, but how do those games hold up on the Nintendo Wii? Nintendo Wii ports are a bit notorious for being much lower quality than their other console counterparts, because the Wii just simply wasn't as powerful. Whilst that doesn't apply to every single Wii port that was ever made, let's see if that does apply to these Spider-Man games. Across its lifespan, the Nintendo Wii had 6 different Spider-Man titles released for the console. In this video, we will cover all 6 of those games in release order, and look at what made them good, what made them bad, and what unique quirks the Wii versions had. Spoiler alert, the main quirk is motion controls. Anyway, so without further ado, our first game is Spider-Man 3. Spider-Man 3 released worldwide on May 4th, 2007, across pretty much every platform available at the time. Later on that same year, it was ported to the PSP as well. So this particular version of the game was developed by Vicarious Visions, who have handled many different games throughout the Spider-Man franchise. They were also the developers behind the PS2, PSP, DS and Game Boy Advance versions of this game. So Spider-Man 3 plays pretty similarly to the 360 and PS3 versions. The overall main story is pretty much the same. Side missions have been changed and some characters that weren't in the film have been removed and replaced. For example, in the 360 and PS3 versions you had characters like Scorpion and Rhino making appearances, as well as Calypso, but in the Wii, PS2 and PSP ports you had characters like Morbius and Shriek, which as far as I'm concerned makes it the superior version. So anyway, let's talk gameplay. This is one of those games that goes proper in for the let's make you feel like Spider-Man vibe, because of the motion controls. If you want to do a light attack, wave the Wii remote. If you want a web swing, wave the Wii remote. If you want to get married and have kids, wave the Wii remote, so on and so forth, you get it. The controls for this game are a mix of motion and standard button pressing. You have to have the nunchuck to be able to play this game, which obviously makes sense. You move Spider-Man around with the analog stick for the nunchuck, and when you're web swinging you can either shake the Wii remote or the nunchuck depending on which hand you want to swing with, which to be honest is a pretty nice touch. Like I say, combat is a mix of motion and button pressing as well. To do a light attack you shake the Wii remote, but to do a heavy attack you press the A button, which on paper is a pretty cool idea, but when trying to combo different moves it can actually be quite hard, because if you move the Wii remote just a little bit too much you can't then do a heavy attack as a third combo move. Overall, the controls are just, they're fine, they're okay, they're a bit hard to get used to, they're not as bad and jarring as they could have been as the first Spider-Man Wii game, but there certainly are better control schemes for Spider-Man games in this video. Graphically, the game looks fine, there's nothing particularly wrong with it, it's a Wii port of a game, it looks better than the PS2 and PSP version of this game, which are near enough the same, but that's not saying much because one's a previous gen console and one's a handheld console, so. The game features most of the cast from the Spider-Man 3 film, and even has Bruce Campbell narrating the tutorial and different sections throughout the game. That was something I always liked about this game, was the Bruce Campbell narration. It is quite funny. There's a section where in the tutorial he gets you to crawl on a wall and he says, well, if you couldn't do that, we'd just call you Man. Is that the game you want to play? Man 3? I found it funny when I was like 8 years old and I still find it funny now. Unlike the 360 and PS3 versions, you are able to change from the black suit to the regular suit at any time just through a short QuickTime event. And similar to the Spider-Man 2 game that preceded this, you can purchase upgrades by using hero points. Just note that these upgrades can only be purchased for your regular suit, not for the black suit. Overall, I quite enjoyed my time with Spider-Man 3 for the Wii. It certainly lacks some polish, but Vicarious Visions did a pretty good job, and considering this is the first Spidey game on the console, I actually don't hate the motion controls they've integrated either. In terms of critical response, the Wii version of this game was one of the lower scorers. In fact, it's in the mixed or average zone, and when I say mixed, my god, there are some highs and there are some lows. This game has review scores as high as 85 out of 100, but also as low as 20 out of 100, giving it an overall metascore of 53. The same goes for the user scores, with some as high as an 8 or 9, and as low as a 1 or 2, giving it a 6.3 out of 10. It's definitely not the best Spidey game for the console, but that said, it isn't an offensive mess either. Now before we go any further, if you're a big fan of Spider-Man games or just licensed tie-in games in general, then this channel is perfect for you, so why not hit that subscribe button and tap the bell for notifications of all my future uploads. Anyway, let's get on with the video. So next up we have Spider-Man Friend or Foe, which released worldwide across October 2007 and released for the PS2, the PSP, the Nintendo DS and Wii, PCs and Xbox 360. The home console versions were developed by Next Level Games, so that's the PS2, Wii and 360. So unlike most of the other Spider-Man games in this list, this game is a very linear beat-em-up with some platforming elements. Now, I played the PS2 version of this game back in the day when I was a kid, and I loved it. And having covered the handheld versions of Spider-Man games, I really did not enjoy this on the DS, and I did not enjoy it at all on PSP. In fact, I found that experience nauseating. So I'm pleased to announce that I actually had quite a good time playing this on the Nintendo Wii. And that is pretty much because this game is nearly identical to the PS2 and 360 versions, just with slightly different looking visuals compared to the 360. While Spider-Man 3 heavily leaned into the Nintendo Wii's motion controls, Friend or Foe doesn't really do this so much. Your standard moveset is simply controlled just by pressing different buttons, with some very mild motion control integration when you want to throw enemies. If you point the Wii remote up or down, that's where you throw them. That's pretty much the main difference between this and the other two home console versions of the game. So if you don't know much about Spider-Man Friend or Foe, this is a game that allows you to team up with both a lot of villains from Spidey's history and some pretty cool Marvel characters like Blade. Iron Fist is also here, but Netflix kinda ruined my impression of that guy. The game starts off with a cool cutscene with Spider-Man and the New Goblin fighting enemies like the Green Goblin, Doc Ock, Sandman and Venom before they're all attacked by a bunch of other symbiotes. They're all then teleported away and Spidey is teleported onto the S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarrier. And that pretty much kicks off the events of the game. Now, this game launched very closely with the Spider-Man 3 game and film, so a lot of the designs here are taken from the Sam Raimi movies, such as Spidey himself, Green Goblin, Doc Ock, Sandman, and the New Goblin. But then there are characters who had yet to appear in live action, like Black Cat, Rhino, Iron Fist, and they all look like their actual comic book counterparts. It's a little bit weird at first because you basically have some live action characters alongside some comic book characters, and the mix is just a little bit weird, but overall the character designs are pretty good. It's a shame that the same cannot be said for the level design. From the get-go, Spider-Man Friend or Foe is pretty much shown off as a globe-trotting adventure for Spidey. So you go to places like Tokyo, Cairo, Transylvania, Nepal, and it's just a shame that every single one of these places looks really, really generic. All of the back settings for these levels just are really bland. Very, very, very generic. It's clear as day that Spider-Man Friend or Foe was of course developed for a younger audience as compared to the other Spidey games, which is evident from the 7+ age rating, as none of the other Spider-Man games have this and are all a minimum of 12 and up. Anyway, the only downside of the home console version as compared to the PSP version is that it does not have Carnage. Carnage was sadly exclusive to the PSP, even though at the end of Friend or Foe on consoles there was a tease called Project Carnage, which never saw the light of day, as the game never got a sequel or any DLC. So if you want to play as Carnage, the only way to do so is on the PSP version. So across the board, Spider-Man Friend or Foe got very middling reviews. The highest score for the game was a 62, with the lowest being a 55. So they're all in the mixed or average realm. The Wii version specifically scored a 59 out of 100, which isn't terrible, it just isn't very good either. However, its user score is much higher, with a 8.5 out of 10 for the Wii version. Again, this isn't a bad game by any means, it's just a very, very average one. However, if you were to sit through and play this with a buddy, I'm sure it'd be a good time. Okay, so next up we have Spider-Man Web of Shadows, which released worldwide in October 2008 for pretty much every platform at the time. The PS3, 360 and Wii versions were developed by Shaba Games with assistance from Treyarch, as in the Call of Duty guys. In fact, Web of Shadows was one of the last times Treyarch developed a game that wasn't Call of Duty, so that's kind of depressing. Now, full disclosure, this was actually my first experience with the main console version of Web of Shadows, because up to this point I'd only played the PSP and DS versions. I would love this game on 360 or PS3, but sadly the digital versions have been delisted, making the physical copies quite expensive. So if you don't know about Web of Shadows, let me just summarise the game for you. It came out at a time where morality systems in games were all the rage. You had games like Fable or Infamous that were pushing this morality system very hard. And to be honest, making a Spider-Man game with that system in place does make sense when you include the black suit. So the game sees a symbiote invasion of New York, and can go one of two ways for you. You have the good way or the evil way, and depending on which way you choose to go will depend on the characters that you can team up with. So if you choose to be a good little Spidey, then you can team up with people like Moon Knight, Luke Cage and Wolverine, but if you choose to be a bad boy, then you will be teaming up with people like Black Cat, Vulture and Rhino. Personally, I just think it's really cool to see other Marvel heroes in a Spider-Man game, so I obviously went with the good choice so I could team up with Moon Knight. Anyway, so this game is a 3D open world action adventure game that manages to improve on the motion controls from Spider-Man 3. Whilst you still have to wave the Wii remote to web swing, it's nowhere near as awkward as it was in Spider-Man 3, and any moves you want to hit and combo with now do not involve you using motion controls. The other main motion control in this game is to switch between the red and black Spider-Man suit, which you just wave the nunchuck for. Now, graphically, Spider-Man Web of Shadows is obviously inferior to the 360 and PS3 ports, but it's still a decent looking game. The cutscenes all look good, but presumably they're the same across all versions anyway, and New York itself looks better than it did in Spider-Man 3. I mean, this game did come out a couple of years into the Wii's lifespan, so by then they should have had a little bit better of an idea about how to best push the console. Combat is also pretty cool in this game. Spider-Man glides and slides around, and it looks pretty cool on scene and feels pretty cool to pull off. The combat is obviously not as fluid as it would go on to be in the PS4, PS5 era Spider-Man games, but it's pretty good here nonetheless. Sadly, at times the story does feel quite awkward, and this game does feature quite a problematic camera, so it's not all good. However, if you can get past some pretty cringy dialogue and a bit of a janky camera, then overall, Web of Shadows is a pretty good time. This game pretty much improves on Spider-Man 3 in every way, and definitely feels like a step in the right direction. In terms of critical response, Web of Shadows for the Wii has a 63 out of 100, with high scores of 84 and lows of 51, so just a mixed bag. The user score for the Wii is a little bit higher with a 7.4 out of 10, still not great, but pretty good. Honestly, the best thing about this game is still the opening cutscene. It's just so unnecessarily dramatic, and it's a meme for a reason. Okay, so next up we have Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions. This game released on pretty much every platform at the time in September 2010, and this version was developed by Beenox, who handled the development of the PS3 and 360 versions as well. The game features 4 different Spider-Men coming together from separate universes, which was really the first time this had happened. In fact, one of the writers for this game later went on to work on the 2014 Spider-Verse comic, which then went on to inspire the Spider-Verse films, so this is really where it all began. The game features Earth 616's Amazing Spider-Man, or really our main Spider-Man, as well as 2099, Spider-Man Noir, and the Ultimate Spider-Man. Each of the worlds have their own unique art style and different gameplay styles. While some are similar, Spider-Man Noir for example has stealth, and Spider-Man 2099 has these glidey freefall sections. Noir's world is all black and white and eerie, whereas Amazing Spider-Man has this kind of cel-shaded look which looks very cool. Other than some control changes and a graphical scale down, Shattered Dimensions on the Wii is identical to its Xbox and PlayStation counterparts. So let's talk about those controls. So what I liked about the controls on Web of Shadows was that the combat was only locked to button pressing, and web swinging was motion controls. Ideally that's how I'd have my Spider-Man games. This, on the other hand, makes web swinging button pressing and combat with motion controls. That is one thing I didn't like about Spider-Man 3 was the mix of button pressing and motion controls in combat, as it made it feel very clunky, and I can confirm the same happens here. Now, both Spider-Man 3 and Web of Shadows were open world 3D experiences, but this now is still 3D, but level based. And honestly, it kinda works in the game's favour. Each of the levels are designed specifically around their respective Spider-Man. For example, with Noir there's lots of shadows and things you can zip up to and stealth take down enemies from above. Each level is lovingly designed with their particular Spider-Man in mind. Each of the 4 Spider-Men all handle pretty much exactly the same, and their movesets are nearly identical, it's just the style that you have to approach a little bit differently. The story itself starts off with Earth 616's Amazing Spider-Man fighting Mysterio when they accidentally shatter the Tablet of Order and Chaos. After this, Spider-Man is then approached by Madame Web, who in the opening cutscene proceeds to be more interesting than she was in her entire solo film.
Yes, I can see you. Standing up for what you believe.
Oh, no.
And sets off the plot nicely. The game across the different universes has you facing off against many different Spider-Man foes and Marvel characters. For example, we have Hammerhead, Kraven, the Goblin, Hobgoblin, and then we've also got characters like Deadpool and Juggernaut. Like I said with Web of Shadows, it's always very interesting to me when outside of Spider-Man Marvel characters turn up in Spider-Man games, so it's pretty cool to see characters like Juggernaut and Deadpool here. Now, I did mention that Shattered Dimensions has a bit of a graphical downgrade compared to the 360 and PS3 versions, however I'd still say this is one of the better looking Spider-Man games on the Wii. All of the art styles, although in a lower resolution, still look fantastic here. The levels look nice, the character design is good, overall Shattered Dimensions is a pretty damn good game. The only thing I really questioned at the start is why was Spider-Man stood with a hunch? Who knows? I mean, the game even opens with narration from the man himself, Stan Lee, so that's pretty damn cool. Now, in terms of critical response, the Wii version of Shattered Dimensions has a pretty nice 75 out of 100 score, putting it in the generally favourable bracket, which is the first game in this video to do so. It also has a user score of 8.2 out of 10, which is also pretty damn good. Personally, just down to the controls, I think I prefer Web of Shadows over this, but it's just user preference depending on what control setup you like. We are now approaching the final 2 games of this video, and just for reference, the final 2 games that were ported to Wii were also identical on the 3DS, which ends up sounding really impressive for the 3DS and really depressing for the Wii. So anyway, let's move on to Spider-Man Edge of Time. This was a standalone sequel to Shattered Dimensions and was once again developed by Beenox. This was released in October 2011 worldwide. This time, instead of featuring 4 Spider-Men from different universes, we have 2, and that is the Amazing Spider-Man and Spider-Man 2099. With the story taking place across both timelines with a cause and effect system in which one Spider-Man's actions would affect the other, and vice versa. It makes next to no sense when you actually think about it, but as a gameplay mechanic, it's really cool. The plot is essentially as follows. Alchemax scientist from the year 2099 Walker Sloan, who by the way is voiced by Val Kilmer for some reason, travels back in time and establishes the company Alchemax many years before it was actually supposed to be. And one way or another, this leads to the foretold death of Peter Parker in his timeline. The game opens with Peter fighting the Anti-Venom and pretty much getting killed by him, and near the brink of death, Peter does his goofy ass drunk walk. I know it isn't meant to be funny, but it just is. I'm sorry, it just is. So this game does away with pretty much all the motion controls from the previous Spider-Man games, with everything now being performed on the Wii Remote and Nunchuck. You jump with A, swing with B, control Spider-Man with the analog stick on the Nunchuck, and you fight using buttons on the D-pad, which at first felt very, very weird. But honestly, once you get used to this very bizarre control scheme, it actually makes a lot of sense, especially if you're not a fan of motion controls. However, across the board of Spider-Man games, I wish we'd have an option to use that and toggle between using that and motion controls, rather than just being locked in with one or the other, but that's fine. Visually, this game looks fine, but they managed to put Shattered Dimensions console version onto the Wii. I'm not sure why they couldn't just do that here as well. It's impressive that this game was on the 3DS, and honestly it played better on the 3DS than it does on the Wii. Yeah, I'm not sure about this game, to be honest with you. I liked what Beanox was going for, especially with the story. It's pretty cool, but in terms of gameplay, Shattered Dimensions is infinitely better than this. I feel weird saying this because one of my favourite 3DS Spider-Man games was this, and on the 3DS it just feels a lot nicer to play. Now, across the board, Spider-Man Edge of Time got very mixed reviews, and actually the 3DS version was the lowest of these, and the Wii the highest. So that just shows it really is down to personal preference. The Wii version's Metacritic score is a 62 out of 100, which is actually not that bad. I'm just not really a fan of this game. The user score for this game is a 7.2 out of 10, which also puts it in the mixed or average, but certainly a lot higher than the critical response. It's a cool idea, just executed not that well, to be honest. So for our final game, we have The Amazing Spider-Man. So unfortunately, this is going to be the part of the video where I turn into a professional hater, because my god, I did not enjoy this game on the Wii. Once again, I played this on the 3DS and I thought it was alright. Edge of Time was definitely better on the console, but it was fine. This, on the other hand, looks horrible. In terms of controls, it's pretty much the same as Edge of Time. You've got your A and B to jump and swing, and the D-pad to perform combat. Except this time you can aim the Wii Remote and point it at where you want to zip your webs to. Which is fine in a bigger open environment, but in certain sections where you need to aim exactly where you're going for, it's quite hard to do so. Anyway, The Amazing Spider-Man launched in June 2012 worldwide on the 3DS, DS, PS3, Wii and Xbox 360. It would later go on to launch on Android and iOS, Windows, and the Wii U, as well as the PS Vita. Pretty much every platform available at the time had The Amazing Spider-Man on it. The main home console versions were all developed by Beanox, including the 3DS port as well. So this is a movie tie-in game that has a plot that actually happens after the events of the film, which is always pretty cool to see. It features Oscorp shutting down, or supposedly shutting down, the cross-species experiments that Curt Connors had done in the film. This is where we get introduced to the game's versions of Spider-Man villains like Rhino, Scorpion, Vermin, so on and so forth. And it's pretty cool, to be honest with you. It's just a shame that it looks terrible. Now, interestingly enough, the opening cutscene to this game has Peter Parker in the first-person perspective, so you can't actually see him. Now, someone commented on my 3DS video saying, now this is because Activision couldn't get the rights to use Andrew Garfield's likeness. I've not been able to find anywhere that actually confirms this, but I wouldn't be surprised. Anyway, so yeah, this game is just kind of glitchy, it looks terrible, and it's just a really dumbed-down version of what you could play on the 360 or PS3. Which again, I find particularly infuriating because they managed to get Shattered Dimensions running perfectly fine on here. There was no reason they couldn't have just dumbed down the already bad visuals anyway and just made the actual game on the Wii. I don't know, maybe I just don't understand the technical limitations of the Wii. Whilst most versions of this game were open world, the Wii and 3DS versions sadly were not. The level designs were pretty similar to sections from the main console versions, but instead this time they were just linear levels. I don't know, I think out of all the console releases, including the 3DS version, the Wii port is by far the worst one. Again, it's got promise, it's got a decent story, it's got a cool setup, it's just the game itself looks terrible and plays not very well. I'm sure this game does have its fans out there, and if you do like this game, then fair enough, we're all entitled to our own opinions, and I'm glad you enjoy it, but for me personally, I think this is just rubbish. The game would go on to get a 58 out of 100 Metascore, with people complaining about the graphical ugliness, as well as having bad controls and a pretty bad camera. Again, it's just a shame. Good story, bad everything else. Interestingly enough, the user score for this game actually falls into the generally favourable bracket with a 7.7 out of 10. So as I said, fair enough to you guys if you like it. Now before we finish up, I actually have a bonus section about a cancelled Spider-Man game. Now, you may remember there was a bit of a lukewarm, mixed reception to the Spider-Man 3 movie. A sequel with Tobey Maguire was planned to feature the Vulture as the main villain, but sadly it ended up getting cancelled and scrapped for The Amazing Spider-Man instead. But the film was so far along that a game to tie in had already been in production, also titled Spider-Man 4. And just a few years back, an early developmental build of the game was found on a Wii development system. It featured 2 unfinished levels, some debug rooms, and some assets. It was pretty cool. Now, based off of the gameplay and the very brief look we did get at this game, it appears it may have also not have been open world, like the previous Tobey Maguire Spider-Man games were. It's unclear if that was just specifically for the Wii port, or if that was going to be the same for the 360 and PS3 as well. Either way, this is still a very cool and interesting look at a forgotten piece of Spider-Man history. Now, in the end, this game actually didn't end up going to waste, because eventually, one way or another, this game turned into Prototype 2, which I have to say is a hell of a lot of fun. Anyway, that takes us to the end of our look at Spider-Man on the Wii. It's not all perfect, but it's not all bad either. What do you guys think of these games? Have you played any? Do you have a favourite? And if you do, let me know in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, and if you haven't already, subscribe and tap the bell for notifications of my future uploads. And as always, I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.